Like an athlete doesn't just eat protein, they want fat, they want carbohydrates, they want to fully hydrate their body, they want plenty of rest. Like all those things are important. Same thing on the mental side. It's hard to do hard things. You want.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Being Yourself show, where world's renowned thought leaders, best-selling authors share their wisdom and insight to help you achieve your goal and be more productive, more fulfilled, and a better version of yourself. If you're new to this channel, then do consider subscribing for a regular dose of knowledge, inspiration, and motivation. This episode is being recorded in association with Let's Localize, an organization with a mission to foster micro contributions from communities and businesses to support schools with their need of time, skill, and money. I'm your host, Ajay Mathur, and my guest today is a best-selling author, globally sought-after speaker, and an entrepreneur. He is a New York Times best-selling author, an award-winning journalist, and the executive director of FlOW Research Collective. He's one of the world's leading experts on human performance. He is author of 9 best-selling books. He has actually written 13. And his newest book, The Art of Impossible, which I've just finished reading. He has been twice nominated for Pulitzer Prize, and his work has been featured in over 100 globally renowned publications. His books have received praise from people like Elon Musk, President Bill Clinton, and Michael Dell. So I'm so super excited to welcome the TED speaker, peak performance expert, and a FlOW researcher, Steven Kotler. Steven, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be with you.
So first of all, Steven, could you tell us what inspired you to go so deep into the FlOW and peak performance?
I started my career as a journalist in the 1990s, and I had 2 beats, 2 things that I was covering predominantly. The first was I was really interested in neuroscience. We were in the 1990s, the very first time we were starting to kind of move into what was then called behavioral neuroscience. How do people work? And at a mechanistic, basic biological level, and how do emotions work? How does peak performance work? How do states of consciousness like FlOW work? These were all sort of new topics in the 90s, and we were figuring that out, and that was incredibly exciting. That was half of what I was doing. The other half of what I was doing was I was obsessed with action sports, surfing, skiing, rock climbing, snowboarding, and the like. And the 1990s and action sports are often spoke about in sports history as this era of impossible, where more so-called impossible feats, things that we never believed were ever going to be done in history, were done than ever before. And because I was living in these communities, I knew these athletes, I was friends with them, I had a front row seat to this. And a couple things were really, really obvious. The first is this was a level of progression in athletic activity unlike anything we'd ever seen in history. It was shocking to see firsthand. Second of all, most of the athletes I knew had difficult upbringings. They came from broken homes, bad childhoods. They had very little money. They had very little education. There's a lot of high-risk behavior in these communities, a lot of drugs, a lot of drinking. Normally, you put that together in a community, people die younger, they go to jail. What they don't do is reinvent what is possible for the human species. And that's what was going on. So I wanted to know why. Why is this happening? What's going on? That was where this first started happening. I wanted to understand ultimate performance. I was interested in neuroscience. It felt like a good tool for trying to figure this out. And I had like these amazing, first round test subjects in front of me that I was like, oh my God, who are these people? What are they doing? I got to figure this out. So that's where it actually started.
So how do you define peak performance? Like, according to you, what percentage of people you think are peak performers?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've never thought about it that way, and let me explain why. What I mean by peak performance is nothing more or less, I guess, than getting our biology and our neurobiology, more specifically, to work for us rather than against us. That's all I mean by peak performance. Now, that biology, when we use that term, that's especially if you're talking about cognitive peak performance, which is most of what I've focused on, that's 4 sets of skills. When you're talking about peak performance, you're talking about a set of motivational skills. Motivation is a catch-all term in psychology. We're talking about extrinsic motivation, intrinsic motivation, goal setting, and grit. Then there's a bunch of learning skills, there's a bunch of creativity skills, and finally there's a bunch of flow skills. And the way to think about that quartet is in any situation, any peak performance challenge or otherwise, motivation is what gets you sort of into the game. Learning allows you to continue to play. Creativity, especially if you're going after hard, challenging, I don't quite know how to get there goals, is how you steer. And then flow, which we can go into greater detail later, but flow is technically, scientifically defined as an optimal state of consciousness where we perform our best and we feel our best, right? It's a ubiquitous state in humans, and it's how we're designed for peak performance. And flow is how we turbo boost all the results beyond most of our reasonable expectations. Whenever you see people achieving the impossible, this is the skill set they're leveraging. And when I say impossible, while my research has been done on what I call capital I impossible, people who have done that which has never been done before and that which we believed never be done, the book is really about people utilizing those same tools to go after what I call small I impossible, those things we think are impossible for ourselves. And this could be, the example I give is I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio in the 1970s. It's a blue collar steel mill town. I wanted to be a writer. From the time I was a little kid, I wanted to be a writer. I didn't know any writers. I didn't know how you became a writer. There was no internet. There were no books. It was like I woke up one day, looked at my parents, and was like, Mom, Dad, when I grow up, I'm going to be an elf. No way to hobbit, right? Like, it was a crazy idea. It's a small, lowercase I impossible. Rising out of poverty, overcoming deep challenges. I'm moving to a foreign country and living there. Becoming world-class in anything you do, becoming a successful artist or entrepreneur or a business leader or a thought leader. These are all lowercase I impossibles. And because all peak performance is leveraging our biology, the same biology that lets you go after capital I impossible allows you to go after small I impossible. But here's the thing. If you're just listening to me and you're like, dude, whatever, peak performance, capital I impossible, I'm just trying to get through Monday. Like, I'd like to get through Monday, make it a little easier. Turns out the toolkit's the same because it's the same biology. So when you say peak performance, you're talking about skills people just utilizing stuff that comes in all of us. I will say, to answer your question, now that I've given that long tangent, I think for sure, if you're top 30%, top 40% of whatever it is that you do, there's no way you can get that high up without using these tools. So what happens, like, for example, if you read Art Impossible, I don't know if this was your experience, but most people, when they read it, they're like, oh, I'm doing this. I didn't know about this. I didn't know it was connected to this. And oh, I didn't know that was how that worked, and it's tied together. The point is that peak performance, all cognitive peak performance over the past 10, 15 years has been a revolution, right? And we've seen the bits and pieces, like great books on focus or grit or flow. I've written some of these books, right? But what is new, what's totally different in the past 5 years is neuroscience has advanced to the point where we're like, oh crap, it's all one system. It's all designed to work together in a certain order, in a certain way. And it's not that you can't do it piecemeal or figure it out on your own or whatever. It's just that if you get it right, if you understand this is how evolution designed the system to work, and if you use the system the way it's designed to work, you just go so much farther, so much faster, with so much less pain and fuss and difficulty, right? That's the big deal here. So I don't quite know how to define peak performance because the definitions are all over the place. What is peak performance? What is optimal performance? There's a lot of different definitions around. That's how I think about these questions, though, if that's helpful.
When I came across the term flow, and I'm very new, I have to admit, I thought it's focus, and it doesn't look like it is. So if you tell us, our audience, what is the difference between focus and concentration and flow?
Oh, that's a great point. So we don't actually know. And what I mean by that is there is a spectrum of attention, right? Starts kind of at one end on like apathy and boredom and like lack of focus. I can't focus on anything, right? And it goes all the way through kind of concentration, and I'm paying attention to what I'm doing, into engagement, absorption, and then flow. And what exactly is the dividing line, and where does one thing lead into the next is an ongoing debate. But what is different about this is flow is an altered state of consciousness. It is not. So when you think of focus and attention, you're thinking that the prefrontal cortex, the executive attention network, is very active. It's doing its job, et cetera, et cetera. That's not the case in flow. So let's talk about what we mean by flow, first of all. I gave you a scientific definition, but it doesn't get us very far. More specifically, flow refers to any of those moments of rapt attention, total absorption, when you get so focused on the task at hand that everything else will start to disappear. Action and awareness are going to merge. Sense of self, that could be the voice in your head getting very, very quiet, is going to start to diminish. Bodily awareness is going to go away. Sometimes at the extreme edge of that, you start to, our boundaries start to go away. We start to feel one with everything, and those kinds of more mystical experiences. We understand the biology underneath them, but self vanishes and other things can happen. Is the point there. Time dilates, passes strangely. Usually, more common experience, gets so interested in what you're doing, so sucked in that like 5 hours go by and you look up and you're like, what, it felt like 5 minutes, right? And throughout all aspects of performance, mental and physical, go through the roof. And this is the major difference between focus and flow. So focus, we're paying more attention to the thing at hand. What happens in flow? I'll give you different numbers done by different researchers. We won't spend too much time here unless you want to come back, but we see motivation, grit, and productivity soar, skyrocket. McKinsey, the business consultancy, did a study over 10 years talking to top executives. How much more productive are you in flow? Self-reported, so take it with a grain of salt, but 10 years is a long time. And they talked to a lot of people. Average was 500% more productive. It's a massive boost. And this is in line with other research. The Department of Defense found that soldiers in flow learn 240 to 500% faster than normal. Research we did at the FlOW Research Collective that was sort of done at USC, University of Sydney, a couple other places, Harvard, found that creativity will spike 400 to 700%. And you can look under those, all aspects of creativity, problem identification, problem solving, all, et cetera, et cetera. Happiness, well-being, overall life satisfaction, meaning, purpose, go through the roof. In fact, when psychologists now define happiness, meaning, purpose, all those things, all of the upper tiers of that, they're all defined by how much flow you have in the experience. So very foundational there. We also see really like foundational 21st century business skills, empathy, cooperation, collaboration, communication, perspective taking. All these things are also amplified in flow. So now you can start to see, oh, wow, this is why flow shows up whenever the impossible becomes possible. This is what's at the center of that work. I get that now. You can't, it's you can use focus. You can't. So in athletics, they have a joke, which is you can win a world championship without flow, but you're going to hate the experience. You're never going to want to do it again. It's so difficult, so unpleasant. You can do it, and it happens. Usually, like why do they have 7-game series? Because you can't win one of those without flow. That's really, when you're looking at a 7-game series, you're looking at a contest between teams trying to get into more flow or less flow or knock the other people out of flow. That's what's going on in a 7-game series. That's one of the things that makes them interesting, I think. Anyways, long answer, but hopefully it was helpful.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to understand. So is it fair to say that focus is much of a...
No, let me give it to you neurobiologically. So,
Yeah.
Because it's easier mechanistically. When you are focusing, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that is right back here, is actively engaged. We are also producing brain waves that are in the beta frequency. Beta is alert, awake, focused, and attentive. In flow, the prefrontal cortex deactivates. It's called transient hypofrontality. That's why our sense of self disappears in flow. That's why time passes so strangely. Time is calculated all over the prefrontal cortex. Parts of it wink out. We lose the ability to separate past from present and future. We're plunged into that elongated now. Our sense of self, again, another network effect produced partially in the prefrontal cortex. The network goes down. We lose our ability to produce our sense of self. Why does it get so quiet upstairs? Because the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, that's essentially our inner critic, turns off in flow. In focus, it's hyperactive. All this stuff is hyperactive. In flow, brain waves drop from beta all the way down to the borderline between alpha and theta. Alpha is daydreaming mode. You're not awake and alert and focused. You're going from thought to thought to thought. Theta is, we're there a lot of different times, but we're also there in REM sleep when we're dreaming, right? So these are very different brainwave patterns. Focus is a very, very different thing from flow. Now, focus is also the key to getting into flow. Flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. The first one is complete concentration. Flow follows focus. It shows up when all our attention is in the right here, right now. So flow states have 22 triggers. That's what they all do. They drive our attention into the right here, right now. They produce and heighten focus. Now, there are lots of different ways to produce and heighten focus. You can use the prefrontal cortex, which is what you do when you're trying to read a book that you're not super interested into, or listening to a lecture or in a meeting, that sort of stuff. You can also produce neurochemicals, dopamine and norepinephrine. These are focus enhancing chemicals. They show up when we're excited, when we're curious, when we're interested. There's other ways of doing it as well. That's what flow leverages, these other kind of more intrinsic systems.
So let's say when somebody is in flow state and you put the EEG or those wires on their head, what would be the state then? Would it be mostly alpha and theta?
Well, so if you're measuring brain waves, yes. I mean, but so you're not asking, that's not a real question in a sense. You have to know, well, where are the brain waves coming from? So for example, when Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who's often called the godfather of flow psychology, in the 70s started doing the EEG experiments on flow, he was looking at chess players. What he found is, yes, their brain waves dropped to lower alpha and theta, but there was no activity in the prefrontal cortex. That's where that finding first showed up. So it's a where and a what, and that's still not only a partial picture. When we talk about the neurobiology of flow, we're also talking about networks, right? Because very rarely do things take place in one place in the brain. There's a whole network effect. We're also talking about changes in neural anatomy, neuroelectricity, and neurochemistry. So all four of these things are shifting significantly, which is what makes flow an altered state of consciousness.
Okay, and you mentioned the name of this hormone, norepinephrine. I mean, I can never say that name. Is it same as adrenaline?
No, it's noradrenaline.
Noradrenaline.
So, yeah.
Noradrenaline.
So in Europe, they call it noradrenaline. In America, they call it norepinephrine, because adrenaline in America originally, though we don't use the term anymore, was epinephrine. It's not anymore. It's now we use adrenaline and norepinephrine, and it drives people crazy, and nobody knows what's going on. So your question about norepinephrine.
So it's about that. Yeah. So it's about when we say that we get adrenaline rush, then probably what we mean is that we get the flow, feeling of flow.
No, well, it depends, because there is an adrenaline rush that is adrenaline. When we trigger the fight response, you get adrenaline, testosterone, cortisol, and norepinephrine, possibly a little dopamine, depending on what the response is being used for. But that's an adrenaline response. Flow flushes stress hormones. So most of those chemicals get flushed out of our system, and you get a little bit of norepinephrine, a lot of dopamine, anandamide, possibly some endorphins. If you're with other people, you'll get oxytocin and some serotonin on the back end. There's obviously way more stuff, glutamine, GABA, and all the other neurochemicals that are involved in brain function are involved too. But so it's a shift in hormonal profiles and neurochemical function and whatnot. So and it's different, just so you understand, when we talk about meditation, right? That's another altered state of consciousness produced by focus. It's actually a different state than flow. So these are different kinds of focusing. Meditation is phenomenal for training flow. It's really good because it trains focus into the present moment. So we will, at the Flow Research Collective, to train people how to use very simple kind of mindfulness respiration techniques a little bit, because it's useful that way. We don't focus a lot on it, but that we do that. And stress reduction is also useful for flow, and mindfulness is good for that too.
Is it only mindfulness, or any sort of meditation will do more or less the same?
Well, so it's interesting. It's interesting when you ask that. So one, can meditation itself produce flow? Open question. I'll come back to that in half a second. Two, this is interesting. If you are a creative, okay, and you're doing, and this, you could be coding, you do creative business deals, right? Like if you're doing any sort of creative work, the research shows you probably want to use a Vipassana-based mindfulness or meditation practice. This is an open senses practice. When you let information sort of flow into your brain, you don't try to judge it and you don't try to linger with it. That trains up creativity. If you're using a focused, I'm following my breath kind of meditation, that trains up convergent, logical, linear thinking. So it depends on what you want to use the mindfulness for. And if you want to use a meditation practice to produce flow. Meditation does not produce flow, but there is some evidence, neurobiological evidence, that there are certain versions of Tibetan white lineage Tantra meditations, some of the Kabbalistic Jewish meditations that involve a lot of visualization and pattern recognition and a lot of stuff with your brain, may be able to produce the neurochemical reaction to tip you into flow. Certain people are, Shahar Arzi at the University of Jerusalem is working on this. My friend and mentor Andrew Newberg is working a little bit on this, but we're really at the front end of figuring that stuff out.
Okay, that's interesting. Because I generally thought that any type of meditation that you do, you get more or less the same effect of it.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
So you have to, what we're seeing now in the overall, to speak to this, the field of peak performance, for most, since the Enlightenment, basically, there has been a general belief in, first of all, rational consciousness, right? Which we now know is not actually how the brain works at all. And there is no kind of rational self that we can aspire to. And so all those ideas are gone, but there's essentially been an emphasis on skills instead of states. And we've gone very, very far. How do we train up skills? But we've come to the 21st century, and the skills we require most now, creativity, cooperation, collaboration, flow, even all these things, those are really much more about states of consciousness and shifting states of consciousness. If you want to be more creative, some of it is a skill set, more of it is a change in a state of consciousness, in the global way the brain processes information. So we're now starting to move in the 21st century, and what is leading the kind of the conversation in peak performance is, states of consciousness. Meditation was one of the first door. Flow, actually, I think the flow work and the meditation work, I don't know which got here first. I think the flow work got serious before the meditation work, but it was going on at the same, roughly starting at the same time, coming out of the 50s and 60s.
Okay. So let's go into the book Art of Impossible, and you explore 4 cognitive abilities: motivation, learning, creativity, and flow to achieve the impossible. Now, how are they all linked? And give us one example wherein you go like step by step, as in how to get into flow state and achieve the impossible.
Like you can't, I wrote a 400-page book that breaks that down, and I've written 7 other books that break that down. There's like, we could talk for the next 2 hours and I could do that for you. I don't know how to do that. I told you how they were linked earlier already. Motivation gets us into the game. Learning keeps us there. Creativity allows us to sort of steer, and flow is how we turbo boost the results. If you want more flow in your life, if that's the question you're asking, or if you're asking questions like, how do you utilize flow to get the impossible? We sort of touched on this earlier. Flow states have triggers. You want more flow in your life, these triggers are your toolkit. And let me give you some examples from that, because I think that'll solve some of what you're trying to get. So I said earlier that flow follows focus, and that's what all these triggers do. They drives attention to the present moment. And I said it does this number of different ways, either by driving dopamine into our system, norepinephrine into our system, or one of the other things triggers do is they lower cognitive load, which is all the stuff you're thinking about at any one time. And if I lower cognitive load, I liberate a bunch of energy that which the brain automatically repurposes to pay attention to whatever it is you're doing. So that's how the triggers work. If you want more flow in your life, they are your toolkit. So some of them are very, very obvious. And this is a problem for some people. Like they're simple, basic biological things, and it trips people up. I always like to say the problem with a lot of this work is I work on psychological and physiological interventions. And if you talk about them in a bar on Friday night, nothing I do is going to get you laid on a Friday night. Like if you talk about it, it's just not sexy. It's not that kind of stuff. So what are these triggers? Novelty, complexity, unpredictability, risk. These are all flow triggers, right? They all kind of drive dopamine into our system, drive focus into that. Pattern recognition, when we link ideas together, that's also produces dopamine in the brain. We've all had this example. You've done a crossword puzzle, you played Sudoku, you get an answer right, you get that little rush of pleasure. That's dopamine. Now, let me give you an example of just how I use this in my life. So as you can see from the bookshelf behind me, to do my job, I have to read a lot of books, and I have to read a lot of those that are neuroscience textbooks. And as you can imagine, there's nothing more exciting in the world than a good neuroscience textbook. And you could also imagine that when you have to read them and you have my job, remembering what you read and being able to use it later is really crucial. So one of the things that I will do, really simple kind of intervention based on flow stuff, is if I have to read something that's really complicated, uh, I usually I'll save it till I have 2 or 3 books. I just did this last week, actually. I went up to Mammoth Mountain, where I haven't been in a really long time. I rented a hotel with a view of the mountain. I skied a little bit so I could keep my body active, but I sat on my balcony and I read neuroscience textbooks while looking out of the mountain. Now, why am I doing this? Well, the mountain is totally novel. It's a novel environment I've not seen before. So just being around it, producing some dopamine. When I'm reading neuroscience also, and it's really quiet and I can really sort of pay attention to what's going on, the goal is pattern recognition, right? I want to learn something that I can apply to something I already know. And I have some knowledge here, so that happens when you read a textbook. So I start with a novel environment. I've got a little bit of dopamine in my system. Now I start reading, connecting new idea, connecting new idea, connecting new idea. That's pattern recognition. That's more dopamine. Now a bird flies by that I've never seen. Oh, look, it's something novel and unpredictable. A little more dopamine. Pretty soon, you're at the front edge of a low-grade flow state, what's known as micro flow. And in flow, learning is significantly amplified. My ability to focus and pay attention for long stretches of time and get through a really difficult neuroscience textbook, like get through 100 pages without noticing, significantly, that sort of thing. So that's just a really practical, simple example of my own life of how I used this stuff last week to read 4 neuroscience textbooks in a couple of days while I was getting some skiing in.
Yeah, I can clearly see, and you are really passionate about what you do. And on that, I read there is a big section in the book which talks about finding your true purpose, finding your passion, and play around with your curiosities to drill down onto one thing. Could you share that tool with our audiences here?
Yeah, and I've actually got a tool for your audience too. So on this, simple idea. I start when we were talking about it, we said motivation. I said, hey, motivation is a catch-all term, right? It's a bunch of stuff. What the research shows, if you're interested in peak performance, you got to actually start with extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation is stuff in the world, money, sex, fame, stuff we'll work for. You don't need a lot of extrinsic motivation, but you have to earn enough money to be able to pay your bills and have a little left over for fun, right? And the reason is simple. Anxiety, when actually norepinephrine, which will underpin anxiety more than anything, but cortisol also, they'll block peak performance. They'll block our ability to get into flow. Little bit, great. You need a little bit of cortisol and a little bit of norepinephrine, but if I turn it up too much, now you're super anxious, you're freaking out, and you can't get into flow. So paying your bills and a little left over solves the problem of like, how do I take care of my family? How do all that stuff. Once that's done, if you want to amplify performance, this doesn't say we're of course going to continue to want extrinsic motivators, right? The desire doesn't go away. But if your goal is to amplify performance, 5 intrinsic motivators start to become way more important than the extrinsic motivation. And this shows up, if you want to motivate employees, for example, once you pay them above a certain level, they don't want more money. They want intrinsic motivators, right? They want passion, purpose, curiosity, autonomy, mastery. That's what you want. And those are the big 5 intrinsic motivators. And curiosity is our first one. It's the foundational intrinsic motivator, right? It's our basic interest in the world. And the big deal here, we started with focus. This is the big deal here. Curiosity gives you focus for free. Focus is really hard for the brain to produce energetically. It's very expensive, right? If you had to actually pay attention all day long to everything, it's exhausting, right? But if you're curious, oh, this shit happens for free. This is fantastic, right? Curiosity is biologically designed to be built into passion. When we say passion, if you're talking about passion neurobiologically, without all the kind of mystification that we like to put on that word, it's literally just the intersection of multiple curiosities coupled to a bunch of wins in that arena, right? Learnings and wins. Once we have our passion, our core passion, the system, our biology, wants purpose. Take that core passion and use it to help something beyond yourself. And there's a bunch of neurobiological reasons why we want purpose. And once you have your purpose, what do you want? You want autonomy. I want the freedom to pursue my purpose. Get out of my way, right? And once you have that, you want mastery, the skills to pursue that purpose well. So these are the big 5 intrinsic motivators, and they're sort of designed to be cultivated in that order. Bonus, they're all flow triggers. So if you get it right, curiosity drives focus, right? Passion, that's a hell of a lot of focus, right? Purpose, not only is that a hell of a lot of purpose, now there's other people involved, and we're social creatures, so other people way more focus, and so forth, right? So how to do this is tricky. Though there's, as you pointed out, there's a huge chunk of the book devoted to it, but we took all this information because people found it so useful. So many people seem to be struggling with this that I just took it. We created at the FlOW Research Collective a free tutorial basically on it. It's called the Passion Recipe. So if you go to www.passionrecipe.com, you'll get this. And there's a tutorial on it, there's a class on it, and I think there's an interactive workbook to help stage you through this process. Because it's essentially, it's foundational to peak performance, right? If you want to go anywhere hard, anywhere challenging, anywhere worth getting to, as far as I can tell, you need all the motivation you can get, right? Like peak performers know this. We know this, athletes know this, right? Of course, they stack fuel sources, right? You would never, like an athlete doesn't just eat protein. They want protein, they want fat, they want carbohydrates, they want to fully hydrate their body, they want plenty of rest. Like all those things are important. Same thing on the mental side. It's hard to do hard things. You want extrinsic motivators, and all 5 of your intrinsic motivators all pointed in the same direction, and you want them producing flow because the state is really pleasurable, and it sort of amplifies everything you're doing along the way, gives you even more motivation. So you want all the fire you can get if you're going after higher challenges. So it's important to know how to turn curiosity to passion to purpose, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's also 2 things that are worth 2 meta comments here. It's worth the time to do this, and it's worth taking the time to do this also. It's not an overnight process. To do the passion recipe properly takes 2 to 3, 4 months. And it's a slow burn, bless you. And all I want to tell people is you want to take the time on that process for the simple reason that, like, you really don't want to be 2 years into your new passion to discover, oh shit, it was only a phase. It's a hobby, right? Like that after you've already, like, I had a friend who just went to Burning Man, she came back, she's like, archaeology is my new passion. She signed up for a 2-year dig in the Sahara. I got like a month and a half in. It was like, what the hell was I thinking? Like, this is not a passion. This isn't even a phase. And she's like signed on for another 18 months in the desert.
Right. So let's say I found something that I think is passion for now, at least. And I found a purpose and I know how to get into flow. Somewhere in the book, we talk a lot about reaching the true potential, and that always triggers a question in my mind. What does that really mean? Because a lot of people say that humans don't do anything to their true potential, right? They're far from it. And let's say we understood the art of getting into flow, we can achieve that true potential. So
so I have to say, I'm not sure I use the phrase true potential anywhere in the book, for the very same reason that you point out. Like, I don't know what the hell that means. I can I define impossible, which is sort of the vaguest term I think I use.
Right.
What I do say is that human beings are designed biologically to utilize their full capabilities. And this is, if 30 years of studying peak performance has taught me a couple of things. I think these are, at first, we're just, all of us, much more capable than we know, right? We're much more capable of going after high, hard goals and tackling the impossible than we know. And the reason we don't know is because human potential, this time I will use that term, is actually invisible. And the reason it is invisible is the only way we can find out what we can do is to take our existing skills, push on them to the utmost again and again and again and again. And what you get an emergent property known as your true potential, right? Whatever the hell that is, your real capability. That's what emerges over time. But when I say that it's invisible, this is like, I'm not joking. I mean, this is work by Adam Grant. It's not my work, but like, I can go to LeBron James, one of the greatest basketball players in the history of the universe, and let's say theoretically that LeBron does not know how to play badminton. And you would think LeBron's one of the best athletes in the history of the world. If you ask LeBron, hey, can you play badminton? Do you think you'll like it? You would say that's a dude who's going to know. He's going to be able to answer that question, right? Even if he's never. And the science shows over and over and over again, we can't answer that question. We don't know what we're going to like or what we're going to be good at until we actually do it and start to learn and get sort of to the almost to the advanced beginner intermediate level is when we can start to answer those questions. So when you say human potential, whatever that term means, is invisible, that's what I mean by that. So like whatever it is that we can become, we want to become. The way Abraham Maslow, the very famous psychologist in the 50s, put this is whatever a human being can be, he must be. And what that actually means, and I do say this in the book, is we as a species, we're actually designed to go big. We're designed to go after high, hard challenges, but there's a flip side, which is not going big is actually bad for us in a really significant way. And let me make that really concrete. When I say we're designed to rise to our full capability, not rising to our full capability, not trying to use our skills to the utmost, not so good for us. Why? What do I mean? Anxiety and depression are the largest plagues in the modern world. 1 out of 10 adults are going to be diagnosed with anxiety and depression over the coming year. It's the largest drain on global public health coffers, and we are failing. We're losing the war. Somebody kills themselves once every 12 seconds, which is insane, right? So if that's the case, what are the big causes of anxiety and depression? Turns out everybody's heard about 2 of them, and they get all the press, and neither are the real deal. So the number 1 and number 2 is trauma. Bad thing happened to me and I can't get over it. I'm anxious and depressed. And genetics. My genes are bad. I can't make enough serotonin. I'll never be happy. And it turns out, if you look under the hood of this, genetics is a made up excuse, because genetics is only 50% of any equation. Lifestyle choices, your early childhood experience, how you're living your life right now, how you live your life on a daily basis. This is what determines kind of depression and anxiety as much as your genetics. And trauma, if you look in the data, what's overwhelming is most times horrible shit happens and we grow from it, and we get what's known as post-traumatic growth, right? That's how we go through our lives. This is what everybody does. This doesn't lead to anxiety and depression, or we'd all be anxious and depressed all the time, right? This is what life is. What are the other major causes? Well, number 1, number 2, lack of meaningful work, lack of meaningful values. What is lack of meaningful work? Work I'm not curious about, that I'm not passionate about, that's not aligned with my purpose, that I don't have freedom, autonomy to pursue in the way I would like to, doesn't give me the opportunity to get math for mastery, to get better at skills I'm going to want later in life, and it doesn't produce flow. That's what we mean biologically, psychologically, by lack of meaningful work. Lack of meaningful values means you don't have passion, you don't have purpose, you're not getting flow, right? Like on and on and on. We're designed to go big. We're designed to use our skills to the utmost. We're designed to rise to our true, I think I use full capabilities. I don't think I use true potential, but I'm using it now because you shoved it into my head. It's stuck there, and I hate the word too. But we're designed that, but not doing it. That's the more important thing here. At least it was to me, because this was something I learned along the way in writing this book. It was in the data, and I was shocked by it, but it makes sense. You want to use a system the way it's built to be used. And if you don't, bad things happen. This is not news to anybody, but it was a little shocking to me when it actually applies to human performance and human beings as well. But does that help?
Yeah, very much.
Yeah, okay.
And the reason I asked this is probably I heard it in one of your interviews, because I'm kind of binge watching you for a couple of days now.
So sorry.
That's all right. I enjoyed it. What I loved about this particular section, wherein you talk about curiosities and passion and purpose and flow, is the things that you just mentioned about doing something that you have no interest in doing. Yeah, those kind of situations will never happen if you do this sort of exercise. So you apply your flow into what you're really passionate about, and if you found your purpose, so that part is really, really valuable. I found. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm glad.
And so let's go out of a little bit of tangent, but in the other chapters of the book, wherein you talk a lot about grit, and you talk about grit precursors and different levels of grit. One of the precursor is willpower, and I'm going to share my personal problem about willpower. So I start my day with the super healthy breakfast, which has like good amount of protein, some amount of carb, and small amount of fat, right? Very good, healthy breakfast. My lunch is a little bit less healthier, but by the time it comes to dinner time, it is the worst sort of food that I'm having in my dinner. So my willpower, starting from in the morning to I have to eat healthy, deteriorates throughout the day. Is there something that we can do to keep that stable? And this is just an example, a kind of metaphor, which we can apply into some bigger things. This is just a small thing, yeah, but.
So, as you pointed out, willpower is a limited resource. We can reset it, but it usually takes a good night's sleep or a state change, a nap, breathwork meditation. These things can be used to strengthen over time, but it declines over the course of the day. What I do, because look, man, I've got the same problem as you, right? So I just do not give myself the option. I don't keep shit in the house that could mess with my diet later in the day, because I can't. I got the same problem as you. So I solve this by sort of not buying that kind of crap and begging my wife not to buy that kind of crap, and cooking healthy dinners and that sort of stuff. The way I'll tell you what I do with willpower stuff and things along those lines. So I always say peak performance is really a checklist, right? If you go through Art Impossible, you'll find there's a bunch of onboarding practices like the passion recipe, what we've been speaking about. But you get to the end of the book, it's peak performance is essentially about 6 daily requirements, about 7 weekly requirements. And some of these things are really, really short. Some of these things basically fold into things you're probably already doing, or you know what I mean, that sort of thing. But it works like compound interest. It's really about doing the checklist today and doing the checklist tomorrow and doing the checklist the day before. And that's how it really starts to matter. And I always end my workday by writing a clear goals list for the next day, right? And I always tell myself I work for the boss. The boss is the guy who writes the list the night before because he's got my long-term best interests at heart. The guy who shows up to work in the morning, maybe that dude has my best interests at heart, or maybe he didn't get enough sleep at night and like somebody brought donuts and they look good. You know what I mean? Like, so the way I do this, and that distancing, by the way, is like, there's a reason for that. That gives you a little space to maneuver. That takes it allows me to sort of take it out of the egocentric a little bit, and so it gives you a little freedom. That's how I, on a personal level, that's how I think about those kinds of challenges.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I have so many questions and I'm really enjoying this conversation, Steven, but in the interest of time, I'll ask you one question, which I ask all my guests, which is, what, according to you, are the top 3 skills that everybody should have, but schools are not teaching it?
That's an interesting
and why?
Question. Top 3 anything, and simply because think about what you do for a living, or what you know what I mean. If I were to say, hey, what are the 3 things you could teach me about what you do for a living that blah blah blah, it's hard to pick just 3 or whatever. When I think about today's education system, I go back to the Partnership for 21st Century Learning, the 21st Century Skills. I've spent a lot of time, creativity skills are foundational. I think some motivational skills are really foundational. What bothers me about about education, in a sense, and maybe this is the answer to your question, because I don't know if I can put in three things, but what bothers me is we don't tell kids how to learn, nor do we tell them why they're learning, right? We tend to send them to school, but we don't frame up, dude, like, you want to learn to think about history because you're living through it and you're going to have to deal with it, and you're going to have to do business inside of history, and it moves in a certain way, blah, blah, blah. You can make it, you can do that. I was just taught shit. Here, learn multiplication tables. Here, learn, like, why? I'm a smart dude. I want to know why. Nobody ever told me why I was learning what I was learning, A, and B, nobody ever told me how to learn. We know a great deal about how to learn, right? We know how to learn. I'm writing a book right now on peak performance later in life. And like there's been a revolution in motor learning theory and skills acquisition and all this stuff in the past 10 years. We really know how to learn. We know how bad learners learn. We know how good learners learn. We know how slow learners learn. We know how to speed up slow learners. All that stuff has been solved. We don't teach kids any of it. We're not born with an instruction book. We send them to school. I think school's supposed to be at least something of the instruction book. And yet you're told a bunch of stuff. You're given a bunch of cool information. But if you don't know how to learn and you don't know why you're learning what you're learning, I don't think, like, it doesn't matter. Everything else doesn't make any sense to me. So I think that's what I think about when I think about how would I change things? And I don't, I try to stay away from educate. Like, I don't have kids. I don't want kids. Curriculum battles are other people's problems. We work on accelerated learning at the FlOW Research Collective, but I let other people take our stuff and take it into schools, because I find you end up in a curriculum battle with parents, and I don't know who's right, or I don't think anybody knows. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And these things are so, I can resonate with that. There are a lot of things that I studied and I have no use of that in my life now, because I never asked why am I learning, because there was no option to ask. You just had to do it. Yeah, so that's really, really powerful. So
it's not even, by the way, it's the funny thing is, a lot of that so-called, I've discovered, this is one of the great pleasures, I think, of growing older. And if you continue to progress later in life, especially if you challenge yourself in new ways, what you find out is whole suites of shit that you learned like in your teens or 20s. Suddenly in your 50s, you're like, oh shit, this is useful. Who knew? So that's a really cool thing. I think if you continue to progress a little bit, sooner or later, because they didn't design our educational curriculums with our bad intentions. Like, so they were thinking when they did it, right? And so eventually you do sort of, if you pay attention, some of it becomes useful. There is certain things. I have yet to factor a polynomial in my professional career. It could happen, but I haven't used Pythagorean's theorem at all, but it could happen.
Okay, great. Thank you, Steven. So now that you're a serial best-selling author and you write every single day, I know that, every morning. So what is coming next?
So I also write novels. I write sci-fi books, and I've got a new sci-fi novel coming out in this November.
Wow, looking forward
to
it.
The Devil's Dictionary. And the FlOW Research Collective level, we have been doing really cool work mapping the neural dynamics of flow state onset. So what goes on in a network level in the brain during, theoretically, what happens during the first 2 seconds of flow, right? You're driving down the freeway on a motorcycle, get cut off by a car, you swerve around, and suddenly you're in flow. What the hell just happened in your brain, right, to allow you to drop into flow? Or you walk into the business, the boardroom, and you start to give a speech to lead a meeting, and suddenly you drop into flow, and what the hell just happened, right? So that's the work we've been doing on the neurobiological level. I'm really excited about that work, because that's sort of a lifetime's worth of actual science research put into kind of one big
Yeah.
paper. So that's been really fun on that front. That'll come out later this year as well.
Yeah, looking forward to it. It sounds really exciting whenever it comes.
Thank
Okay,
you, man.
thank you very much, Steven, for your time. I really thoroughly enjoyed it and I learned a lot from you. Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Guys, if you're looking to know more about Steven's work, please do check out his website. I'll put all the links down here and the book, Art of Impossible, and many other best-selling books that he has written. And if you found this interview useful, then do consider subscribing to this channel. I will see you again. Until then, you take care and keep learning.
Man, that was super fun. Thanks for being a great interviewer.